So good afternoon, or good morning, sorry. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a Bavarian passport or a German passport. That means my normal language is German, and I got thrown out of school in the mid-60s because of my marvelous English. So if you may have some problems understanding me, sorry for that. So I was given 30 minutes to inform you a little bit about a radio and now since many years television station which operates since 66 years here in Europe. Not too much time to talk about 66 years. We make it short, talk a little bit about the AFN radio site. During 1943 and the years later, thousands of American soldiers were moved to Great Britain and stationed there, waiting for the big invasion. They had a lot of spare time in these years, and they were something really missing, information and music from back home. And this was something the BBC Home Service couldn't provide. So General Dwight D. Eisenhower and General George C. Marshall decided after an important meeting to do something in this case. The soldiers first got a regular magazine called the Yank magazine, a newspaper called the Stars and Stripes, and finally they got a radio station. So AFN officially opened in July, on July 4th, 1943, broadcasting from a tiny studio at BBC House in London. The station started with the Star Spangled Banner and was heard via 5 50-watt transmitters in US Army camps, but not in London. So Gary Bautel still is working with AFN, now in Mannheim, where the headquarters are. He's head of radio news. Well, after France moved out of the NATO many years ago, all AFN stations had to be closed there. Also in Austria, 1955 was the deadline. All AFN stations got out. The Blue Danube Network, as it was called in Austria, went off the air. AFN stayed in Europe, broadcasting from its headquarters in Frankfurt. In earlier years, they used the castle in Höchst, and from several affiliates throughout Germany, Belgium, and Holland. Right after the war, AFN Munich started to broadcast, AFN Stuttgart came, AFN Bremen, where we see some pictures from in a couple of seconds. AFN Bremen moved to Bremerhaven, and AFN Berlin was the first station to go 24 hours around the clock because the so-called raisin bombers who flew food and other things into the city during the Russian blockade needed the transmitter of AFN for their navigation. The Cold War started in Europe. More American soldiers were moved in and new stations came. AFN Kaiserslautern, still broadcasting today. AFN Nuremberg, the Tower of Power as they called them. AFN Würzburg, and in the Benelux here, AFN Camp New Amsterdam started to broadcast television in '82. Radio came then in 1986. The station later moved to Soesterberg and was later transferred to the US Air Force, so it was no more an AFN station. AFN Shape started broadcasting in Mons in Belgium in 1974, doing their own programs 24 hours around the clock until December '84, when the station was linked via microwave link to Frankfurt and received radio and television from there. AFN did, of course, many live programs in the earlier years. Later then, more and more pre-recorded shows came from the United States with well-known American disc jockeys. You know how a 30-centimeter record looks like? But this was one not in the shops. It says Armed Forces Radio. And two of these records were one complete 55-minute radio show. So the two I'm holding here, on one side of both of them is a country show from Gene Price from 1992. And the other side holds two parts of Don Tracy Urban Music Show, also aired in the same time. So all these shows were pre-recorded in the States and sent to AFN stations all over the world. Now these two, Gene Price, Don Tracy, were famous in these years. Jim Pewter, of course, Charlie Tuna, Roland Bynum, Roger Carroll, Pete Smith, Mary Turner doing urban rock, and of course, Wolfman Jack. As the very good guarded, and always locked archives at AFN Frankfurt had been finally closed as AFN moved to Mannheim, thousands of shows of these disc jockeys were still in the studio and in the archive I was just talking about. But all the Wolfman Jack shows were gone. Nobody knows where they are. Well, these shows, 55-minute long, were pressed on records. AFN Frankfurt played these shows and sent them by line to affiliates. So AFN Shape, when they aired Charlie Tuna, the record was playing in Frankfurt. The show was on the air at the same time in Bremerhaven, for example. Beside these shows with different music styles, all local AFN stations had, of course, their local shows, mostly in the morning, during afternoon hours. And in the 90s, delivery of these records, I showed you just a second ago, were stopped. Cassette tapes came then in. Unbelievable. Normal cassette tapes, very noisy, which they used for about 2 or 3 years to play the pre-recorded shows until this complete thing was completely stopped. Satellite technology was gone so far that more and more programs could be sent over by satellite to Europe. Well, besides these shows I showed you here, AFN got, of course, every week new records with the actual pop songs on it. They were all pressed on records like this, especially made for AFN. So AFN never played a 17-centimeter single or a 7-inch single, for example. This was later, of course, changed over to CD. Now, AFN was in its earlier years only a medium wave station. In the 70s and 80s, Stuttgart, Berlin, and Frankfurt started FM outlets with automated music, so-called elevator music. They ran for some years. Some of the stations also offered in the evening hours special programs like soul or classic rock. All these FM stations got together in the 90s, and they became the so-called Z-FM network. The Z stood for Zoo. Remember, American radio stations, if you go to Chicago, for example, you have 43 different radio stations, 43 different programs. AFN had 2 channels, so they had to form a program to satisfy every musical taste. So on ZFM day-over programs were done in Frankfurt for all stations, mostly done live during night hours, and in the weekend AFN took over and still does take over ready-made shows from the United States. Live done, neutral, without any station call in it. Who listened to AFN, or who's listening today? Well, of course, the official audience, members of the United States Army, their families, because AFN is still here for them, for their need of information, and of course for their requests. AFN played also requests for German and other non-American listeners, members of the so-called silent listeners group. There have been millions of people here in Europe eager to adopt American music and culture. AFN did regularly research, but never told officially how many non-Americans were listening to AFN in Europe. The 90s saw the fall of the Iron Curtain, and the political situation changed, and a lot of American soldiers left Germany, went home, or were stationed in Bosnia, Hungary, or the Kosovo. AFN Munich closed on the 14th of February 92, AFN Bremerhaven on the 31st of March 93. AFN Berlin followed on the 15th of July 1994. Also, Nuremberg and Würzburg were shut down, and just a couple of weeks ago, AFN Heidelberg was closed and is moving back to Stuttgart. AFN Frankfurt was the AFN Europe headquarters for many years. Then the Army moved out of Frankfurt. AFN stayed there for many years until 2004. Moved then to Coleman Barracks in Mannheim. We saw pictures. And it seems like the same game is played there. The Army plans to move out of Coleman Barracks. So AFN would still stay there in one building. And everything else will be empty. AFN runs still, beside television of course, its medium wave stations today, used mostly as an information source. It airs nearly the complete day National Public Radio, which is relayed from the United States. ZFM as a name for the FM programs is gone. The station is called now the Eagle. This change of name came with the Second Iraq War. They provide a lot of programming with just music done live at the studios in Mannheim. Television, very shortly, AFRTS or AFN delivers several television programs for its viewers, but it's not possible for us as Europeans to watch that. They are on Eutelsat 2 and have a very good decoder system. I heard from people who tried to hack this, no chance. AFN still operates in Germany today. AFN Stuttgart, just mentioned that, AFN Kaiserslautern. Then AFN Bavaria, which served the North Bavarian training district at Grafenwöhr, where the United States government spent millions of dollars during the last years. Then AFN Hessen is working as a small station, AFN Shape, in Belgium at NATO headquarters, of course. Most of the AFN stations are today outside of Germany, in Bosnia, in Hungary, in Turkey, in Italy, where a couple of stations are working. But all these stations get their programs either direct from the United States or via AFN Europe in Mannheim. AFN does not play a big role for German listeners anymore today, also not for Dutch listeners or Belgian listeners. There is too many other radio on the market. AFN loses military audience too. Some of you may have read this article of Hansen Freewave a couple of months ago. Most of the American soldiers are young people. They got their iPods, their MP3 players, and they tune in to listen to the news or watch the news on television, and then they turn the radio off. So, that's it. We close this with a promo from, I think, 1995. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if this is still working. Yeah? But that's in a relay of AFN Shape and relays local programming from Shape. Yeah. Okay. So, we end this presentation with a promo from AFN. And if you're interested, a couple of years ago, I had the chance to do with a historian who was the man who officially had the order to keep the history of AFN in the book, which never comes out because there is nobody who wants to finance this project. We produced a CD which came out in 2003. With a couple of recordings of these years. Some of them are left and they are sold at Rob's. So, thank you very much. If you have any questions, I will be around here. You can ask me. Maybe I can help you, because I was given 30 minutes and I think I'm in the limit.